most hilarious way your kid has ever broken the rules. I need to start this story by saying that I am not a strict parent. I'm the kind of mom who lets my kids stay up late on weekends, eat cereal for dinner sometimes, and build blanket forts in the living room. But there was one rule in our house that I refused to bend, and there was a very good reason for it. The rule was simple. No selling things from our house to strangers. That was it. No lemonade stands on the sidewalk without me. No online selling. No business ideas involving the neighbors. Just no. Why? Because my son Ethan is 9 years old and has the entrepreneurial spirit of someone who would absolutely sell the refrigerator if he thought it would make $5. He's the kind of kid who gets an idea and runs with it way too far. Once he tried to charge his cousin $2 to sit on the couch because he called it the VIP section. Another time he tried to sell rocks from the backyard as rare dinosaur eggs. So yes, the rule existed for a reason. Ethan didn't like this rule. He accepted it. But in the way a kid accepts a rule while secretly planning how to beat it later. He would ask questions sometimes. Very suspicious questions. "Mom," he said once while eating breakfast, "what exactly counts as selling?" I looked up from my coffee. "That's a weird question." He shrugged. "I'm just curious. Selling means exchanging something for money. What if it's not money?" I narrowed my eyes. "What do you mean?" "Like trading." I paused. "No trading either." He sighed dramatically and went back to his cereal. Looking back now, that was warning sign number 1. Over the next few weeks, Ethan started acting weird. Not bad, just suspicious. He began collecting things. Random things. Bottle caps. Toy pieces. Old comic books. Rocks. So many rocks. Our living room slowly started looking like a very disorganized museum. "Why do you have a pile of sticks in your backpack?" I asked one afternoon. "They're materials." "For what?" "Stuff." Kids say things like that and expect you to accept it. Usually I do. But this time something felt off. Then came the notebook. One evening I walked past his room and saw him writing furiously. "What are you doing?" I asked. He slammed the notebook shut. "Homework?" "You don't have homework." He froze. Then he slowly turned the notebook around so I couldn't see it. "Planning." "For what?" He shrugged. "Future stuff." Now, as a parent, there are moments where you feel a small alarm bell in your brain. Not a loud one, just a quiet ding. This was one of those moments. The next warning sign came from my neighbor, Mrs. Delgado. She stopped me while I was getting the mail. "Your son is very creative," she said. I smiled cautiously. "What happened?" "Oh, nothing bad. He just knocked on my door yesterday." "And?" "He asked if I wanted to invest." My stomach dropped. "Invest in what?" She laughed. "I think he called it a rock discovery company." I closed my eyes. Of course he did. When I confronted Ethan later, he looked completely innocent. "Were you trying to sell rocks to Mrs. Delgado?" "No." "What were you doing then?" "Looking for investors." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not." I rubbed my temples. "Ethan, remember the rule? No selling things." "Exactly. I wasn't selling." I sighed. Technically, he was right. But again, warning sign number 2. A few days later, I noticed something even stranger. Kids were coming to our house. Not just his usual friends. Different kids. Kids from down the street. Kids from school. At first, I assumed they were just playing. But they didn't stay long. They would come to the door, talk to Ethan, then leave, sometimes laughing, sometimes holding something. Once I saw a kid leave with 3 rocks and a plastic dinosaur. That was when my brain started connecting dots. But I still didn't fully understand what Ethan was doing. And that's when everything finally exploded. Because one Saturday afternoon, I got a phone call from the school principal. And the first thing he said was, "Mrs. Parker, your son has started something that we're trying to understand." That sentence is never good. When the school principal calls you on a Saturday, your brain immediately jumps to the worst possible scenarios. Fighting. Bullying. Breaking something expensive. But the tone in Mr. Carter's voice wasn't angry. It was confused. Very confused. "Mrs. Parker," he said, clearing his throat, "I'm not entirely sure how to explain this. So I thought it would be better if you came to the school." My stomach tightened. "Is Ethan okay?" "Oh yes," he said quickly. "He's perfectly fine." Pause. "Actually, he's doing quite well." That sentence made absolutely no sense. What does that mean? "Well, he started something here." I waited. "A business." I closed my eyes. Of course he had. When I arrived at the school gym, the scene in front of me looked like something from a tiny, chaotic convention. Kids were gathered around a folding table. There were signs. Charts. Little containers full of random objects. And in the middle of it all was my son Ethan, standing proudly behind the table like a miniature CEO. Above his head was a giant poster board that read, "The official neighborhood discovery exchange." I stood there for a moment trying to process what I was seeing. The principal walked over. "I think you should talk to him." "Oh, I was going to." I marched toward the table. "Ethan." He looked up and beamed. "Mom, you're here." "Yes, I'm here." I gestured to the entire situation. "What is this?" He spread his arms proudly. "My system." "What system?" "The discovery exchange." That answered absolutely nothing. Around him were at least 15 kids, each one holding something weird. Rocks, stickers, toy cars, comic books. One kid was holding what looked like a half-eaten granola bar, and they were all trading. But not randomly. There were little labels, categories, even a whiteboard chart. My son had somehow built a fully organized trading market inside the school gym. Ethan, I said slowly, are you selling things? He shook his head immediately. Nope. Are you exchanging things for money? Nope. Then what is happening here? He pointed proudly to a sign. It said, no money allowed. Below that, items only. Then he explained. And I swear I nearly laughed out loud right there. Mom, he said patiently, like he was explaining something obvious. You said I wasn't allowed to sell things. Yes. And selling means exchanging for money. Yes. So I didn't use money. I stared at him. What did you use? He held up a laminated card. Points. Of course he did. Ethan had invented a completely separate economy. Kids would bring objects. He would assign them point values. Then other kids could trade their points for different items. And somehow, this system had exploded. Kids from multiple classes were participating. They had little notebooks tracking their points. Some kids had even started bringing items from home to trade. It was basically a tiny, chaotic stock market run by a 9-year-old. I turned to the principal. Why is this happening in the gym? Mr. Carter sighed. Well, originally it started on the playground. Of course it did. But then kids started arguing about trades, so a teacher moved them inside. And now? Now we're trying to figure out whether this is technically allowed. Because technically, Ethan wasn't selling anything. I looked back at my son. How long has this been going on? He thought about it. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. My child had secretly built an underground trading economy in 2 weeks. And that's when things got worse. Because one of the teachers suddenly rushed over looking panicked. Mr. Carter, we have a problem. Everyone turned. What happened? The principal asked. The teacher held up a small glass jar. Inside it was a goldfish. Apparently one kid had traded a toy dinosaur for the goldfish. Then another kid tried to trade 3 slime containers and a Pokemon card for the fish. Now 2 parents were involved, and neither of them were happy. Within the next 30 minutes, the gym turned into complete madness. Parents started arriving. Kids were arguing over trades. One child was crying because he had traded his favorite action figure for something called rare moon dirt. Spoiler, it was just gray sand Ethan had labeled creatively. Another kid claimed someone had manipulated the rock market. I wish I was making this up. Meanwhile, Ethan stood behind his table calmly organizing everything. Mom, don't worry, he said. I am worrying. This happens in markets. What markets? Real ones. I stared at him. You are 9. The situation escalated when Mrs. Delgado showed up. Remember her? The neighbor he had tried to get investments from. Apparently her grandson had traded a brand new toy car for what? Ethan labeled as a historic stone. She held up the rock. This is from my driveway. Ethan examined it thoughtfully. It's still historic. At this point, the principal tried to shut everything down. All right, everyone, trading is over. Kids groaned. Someone shouted, but I have 400 points. Another yelled, I was about to get the goldfish. Yes. Apparently, the goldfish had become the most valuable item in the system. The teachers started separating kids. Parents argued about trades. The gym sounded like a tiny stock exchange meltdown. And in the middle of it all, Ethan turned to me and whispered, Mom, this might be getting a little complicated. You think? Then the final disaster happened. One kid suddenly shouted, Wait, if there's no money, how does Ethan get paid? The entire room went silent. Everyone turned to look at my son. Even I looked at him. Slowly, suspiciously. Ethan, I said, how do you get paid? He hesitated. Then he pointed behind the table. And that's when I saw it. A giant plastic bin. Filled with items. Rocks. Toys. Candy. Cards. Even a small drone. My son had been taking commission. 10% of every trade. I stared at the bin. Then at him. Then back at the bin. You built a trading market. And charged fees? He nodded proudly. That's how businesses work. By the time I dragged Ethan and the bin of fees back home, I was emotionally exhausted. My living room looked like a toy store explosion. Trading cards everywhere, small rocks in every corner, and at least 3 random granola bars in suspicious places. I sat him down. Ethan, do you realize what you just did? He blinked innocently. Yes, I ran a market. No, you violated the rule. He tilted his head. I didn't sell anything for money, Mom. You said that was the rule. Yes, but the points, the commission, the parents calling the school. He shrugged. Technically, I didn't break the rule. I stared at him. You are impossible. Over the next week, calls from parents kept coming. Did you know Ethan is charging 10% on trades? Yes, we know. Do we need to supervise him? Yes, obviously. And of course, the kids at school were now obsessed. Trading points, making spreadsheets, drawing graphs. Ethan had unintentionally started a mini stock market among 9-year-olds. I tried to explain to him that businesses aren't supposed to start in the school. Gym without adult supervision. He just looked at me. But Mom, it's an educational experience. I buried my face in my hands. The goldfish? That became the most dramatic element. Turns out, A kid's little brother had tried to invest in it and accidentally spilled its container. The fish was fine, but chaos ensued. Parents yelled. Teachers tried to calm everyone. Ethan calmly auctioned the goldfish back into circulation using points. At one point, my neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, literally said, I don't even know how to parent anymore. Exactly, me neither. In the end, Ethan's market collapsed on its own. Kids lost interest when homework and sports interfered. The parents finally agreed that no more trading at school was allowed. But Ethan? He still believed he had created a thriving economy. Weeks later, he came up to me. Mom, technically I didn't break the rule. I just innovated. I stared at him, stunned. You are going to give me a heart attack someday, I said. He smiled. And maybe that's the fun part. Looking back now, I still laugh and cringe every time I think about it. A 9-year-old built a neighborhood economy. He technically followed the no-selling rule. Parents, teachers, and neighbors were all dragged into chaos. And somehow everyone survived. Parenting teaches you many things. One of the most important, if your kid has a sharp mind and zero fear of rules, be prepared for complete and hilarious chaos.